I never thought I would become the kind of person who obsesses over a roof rake. But here I am, standing in my garage staring at the empty spot where my perfectly good snow removal tool should be, wondering if my neighbor Patricia O'Connor actually had the audacity to walk into my shed and steal it. My name is Samuel Lawson, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Heights development in Rochester, Minnesota, for the past 8 years. This place is one of those planned communities where every house looks vaguely similar. The lawns are required to be a specific shade of green during growing season, and the homeowners association has more rules than the federal government. I bought my house here because the schools were good, and the neighborhood seemed quiet. What I did not know was that Patricia O'Connor, the vice president of our HOA board, lived 3 houses down and treated the entire street like her personal kingdom. Patricia was everything you would expect from the stereotypical HOA board member. She was a woman in her late 40s with that particular haircut that screams for a manager, always wore athletic wear despite never actually exercising, and had this annoying habit of speed walking through the neighborhood with her phone out, taking pictures of any violation she could find. A blade of grass too tall. Photo. Christmas lights up past January 2nd. Photo. Your trash can visible from the street on a non-collection day. You better believe that was a photo and a fine. I had managed to stay mostly off her radar for years by being meticulous about following the rules. I mowed my lawn every Saturday morning. I kept my house painted an approved shade of beige. I never left my garage door open for more than 30 minutes at a time, as stipulated in Section 12 of the HOA bylaws. But apparently, that was not enough for Patricia. It was the first week of February, and we had just gotten hammered with nearly 2 feet of snow. Minnesota winters are no joke, and anyone who owns a house here knows that you need proper equipment to deal with the aftermath. I had purchased an excellent roof rake the previous year after watching my neighbor's roof develop ice dams that cost him thousands in damage. The rake had a 20-foot extendable handle and could pull snow off the roof safely from ground level. It was not cheap either, running me about $200, but it was worth every penny for the peace of mind. The morning after the snowstorm, I bundled up in my heavy winter coat and trudged out to my shed to grab the roof rake. I needed to clear my roof before the sun came out and started the freeze-thaw cycle that creates those damaging ice dams. But when I opened the shed door and looked at the corner where I always kept the rake, it was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had moved it somewhere else and forgotten. I am not the most organized person in the world, and my shed can get cluttered during the winter months. I spent 20 minutes moving around my snow blower, shovels, bags of salt, and various other items, but the rake was nowhere to be found. That was when I started to get that sinking feeling in my stomach. I stepped back outside and looked around my yard. There were no signs of forced entry on the shed, which was not surprising because I rarely locked it. This was supposed to be a safe neighborhood, and who steals a roof rake? The snow on the ground was pristine except for my own footprints leading from the house to the shed. If someone had taken it, they had done so before the snowstorm. I walked back inside and asked my wife, Jennifer, if she had seen the roof rake anywhere. She looked up from her coffee and shook her head. I have not touched that thing since you bought it. Did you check the garage? It was never in the garage. I always kept it in the shed because of the long handle, she shrugged. Maybe someone borrowed it. That struck me as odd, without asking. People do strange things, she said, returning to her laptop where she was working from home. I decided to walk around the neighborhood to see if I could spot my roof rake. Our development was not huge, maybe 50 houses total, arranged in a meandering pattern around a small man-made pond. As I walked down Willow Creek Drive, I noticed several of my neighbors out clearing their roofs. Tom Henderson, 2 houses down, was using a push broom duct taped to an extension ladder, which looked incredibly unsafe. The Martins across the street had hired someone with professional equipment. But no one had my distinctive blue and silver roof rake. Then I reached Patricia O'Connor's house, and there it was. Sitting right there on her front porch, leaning against the railing, was my roof rake. I could tell it was mine because of the small dent near the handle where I had accidentally backed into it with my car last year. There was also a strip of orange duct tape I had wrapped around the grip for better traction. No question about it, that was my property. I stood there in the street for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Patricia had walked into my shed, taken my roof rake, and was now using it as if it belonged to her. The sheer audacity of it made my blood pressure spike. I marched up to her front door and rang the bell. Patricia answered after a moment, wearing her usual outfit of expensive yoga pants and a fleece pullover. She looked at me with that fake smile she always wore when dealing with homeowners. "Good morning, Samuel. What can I do for you?" I pointed at the roof rake. "That is mine." "You took it from my shed." Her expression did not change. "I am sorry, I do not know what you are talking about. This is my roof rake." "No, it is not. See that orange tape on the handle? I put that there. And there is a dent right here." I moved closer to point it out. Patricia stepped partially outside, blocking my access to the rake. "A lot of roof rakes have tape on them, and dents. This is a common tool. I purchased this last year." "You did not purchase anything. You stole it from my shed." Now her smile disappeared, replaced by that stern look she used at HOA meetings when someone questioned her authority. "I am going to need you to stop making accusations, Samuel. I have never been in your shed, and I resent the implication that I would steal anything from anyone. If you are missing a roof rake, perhaps you misplaced it or one of your other neighbors borrowed it, but this one belongs to me." I could feel my jaw clenching. "Patricia, I know that is my rake. I can prove it if you just let me examine it closely." "I will do no such thing." "You are on my property making wild accusations, and if you do not leave right now, I will call the police and report you for harassment." This was insane. She had stolen from me and was now threatening to call the cops on me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Fine. If that is how you want to play this, I will see you at the next HOA meeting." Patricia's eyebrow raised slightly. "The HOA meeting is for community business, not personal disputes over tools you think you own." "Pretty sure theft by a board member counts as community business," I said, turning to walk away before I said something I would regret. As I walked back to my house, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. This woman had some nerve. Not only had she stolen from me, but she was going to lie straight to my face about it and threaten me when I called her out. I needed to figure out how to handle this situation properly, because I knew Patricia well enough to know she would not back down easily. When I got home, I immediately started documenting everything. I took photos of my shed from multiple angles, showing that there was no lock and noting the lack of my roof rake in its usual corner. I went through my email and found the receipt from when I had purchased the rake from a hardware store in Rochester. I even found a photo on my phone from last spring that showed the rake in the background, clearly visible with the orange tape already on the handle. Jennifer came into my office and saw me printing out documents. "What are you doing?" I explained the entire situation to her, and her eyes went wide. "Patricia stole your rake. That is crazy. Why would she do that?" "Because she is Patricia O'Connor, and she thinks she can do whatever she wants," I said, organizing my papers into a folder. "And because she probably figured I would never notice or never call her out on it." "What are you going to do?" The next HOA meeting is in 3 weeks. I am going to add an item to the agenda about board member conduct and theft of personal property. Jennifer looked concerned. Are you sure you want to escalate this? Maybe you should just let it go. Buy a new roof rake. It is not about the rake, I said, though even as I said it, I knew that was not entirely true. It was partially about the rake because $200 is $200, but it was more about the principle. If Patricia thinks she can steal from homeowners and face no consequences, what else is she going to do? Who else has she stolen from? This needs to be addressed, my wife sighed. Just be careful. You know how vindictive these HOA people can be. She was right about that. I had seen Patricia, and the rest of the board, make life miserable for people who crossed them. The Johnsons down the street had gotten into a dispute about their fence height 3 years ago, and Patricia had them inspected and fined for every tiny violation she could find until they finally gave up and moved away. But I was not the Johnsons. I had followed every rule meticulously, and I had documentation to prove it. Over the next few days, I did some investigating. I talked to several of my neighbors casually, asking if they had noticed anything odd or if they were missing any tools. Tom Henderson mentioned that his weed trimmer had disappeared from his garage last summer, but he had assumed his teenage son had borrowed it and left it somewhere. Mrs. Martinez said she could have sworn someone had taken several bags of mulch from her yard, but her husband insisted she had miscounted. The more I talked to people, the more I realized this might not be an isolated incident. Patricia might have been helping herself to neighborhood property for a while now, but no one had called her out on it because she was on the HOA board, and people were afraid of retaliation. I decided to document everything with timestamps. I took a video of myself walking from my house to Patricia's house and clearly showing the roof rake on her porch. I did this 3 separate times over the course of a week, always making sure the date and time were visible on my phone. Each time the rake was there, sometimes in slightly different positions, proving she was actively using it. On the 4th day after I discovered the theft, I went through the HOA bylaws completely. Our association had 52 pages of rules and regulations covering everything from approved paint colors to the maximum height of basketball hoops. But buried in Section 38 was a code of conduct clause for board members. It stated clearly that any board member found to have engaged in illegal activities, including but not limited to theft, fraud, or harassment of homeowners, could be removed from their position by a majority vote of the full board and homeowner body. Perfect. I had my ammunition. I sent an email to Richard Warner, the HOA president, requesting to add an item to the agenda for the next meeting. Richard was a retired accountant in his 60s who mostly let Patricia run things because he did not want the hassle. He replied asking what the item was regarding, and I kept it vague, just saying it was a matter of board member conduct that needed to be addressed. He agreed to add it to the agenda. The next 2 weeks dragged by slowly. Every time I looked outside and saw Patricia's house, I could see my roof rake still sitting there on her porch, taunting me. I had to borrow a rake from my coworker to clear my own roof, which was embarrassing to explain. But I kept my cool and focused on preparing for the meeting. I made copies of all my documentation, organized chronologically. Receipt from the purchase. Photos showing the rake with the distinctive orange tape. Photos of my empty shed. Videos of the rake on Patricia's porch on multiple dates. Testimony from neighbors about their missing items. The relevant section of the HOA bylaws. I even prepared a brief speech, though I knew I would probably be too angry to stick to it exactly. Jennifer asked me multiple times if I was sure about this approach. What if it backfires? What if the board sides with her? Then at least everyone will know what kind of person she is, I said. But I do not think they will side with her. The evidence is pretty clear. The day of the meeting finally arrived. HOA meetings in our neighborhood were held in the community center, a small building near the pond that also served as a gathering space for various neighborhood events. These meetings typically drew maybe 10 to 15 homeowners, usually the same people every month who liked to complain about various issues. But word had spread that something interesting was going to happen at this meeting, and when I arrived 15 minutes early, the parking lot was already half full. I walked in carrying my folder of evidence and found a seat in the third row. More and more people kept filing in, and I started recognizing faces I had never seen at these meetings before. The room had maybe 60 chairs set up, and by the time the meeting was supposed to start, every single one was full, with people standing along the back wall. Patricia noticed the crowd too. She was sitting at the front table with the other board members, Richard Warner and Treasurer Dorothy Chen, and I could see her looking around with a puzzled expression. She had not connected my agenda item with the unusual turnout yet, but she would soon enough. Richard called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. He went through the usual preliminary business, reading the minutes from the last meeting and giving a financial report. Dorothy droned on about the association's bank balance and upcoming expenses for landscaping and snow removal. A few homeowners asked questions about when certain repairs would be completed. It was all terribly boring, and I could tell people were getting restless. Finally, Richard looked at his agenda and said, "We have one additional item tonight. Samuel Lawson has requested to address the board regarding board member conduct." Samuel. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, very aware that everyone's eyes were on me. I placed my folder on the podium and took a breath. "Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this matter before the board and the community." Patricia was staring at me now, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she realized what this might be about. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. On February 3rd, I went to my shed to retrieve my roof rake following the major snowstorm we experienced. The rake was not there. After searching thoroughly, I walked through the neighborhood to see if I could locate it. The room was completely silent. Everyone was listening. I found my roof rake on the front porch of Patricia O'Connor's house. I gestured toward Patricia, who sat up straighter, her face starting to flush. When I confronted her about it, she denied that it was my property and threatened to call the police on me for harassment. "This is ridiculous," Patricia interjected, but Richard held up his hand. "Let him finish, Patricia. You will have a chance to respond." I nodded my thanks to Richard. "I have substantial evidence that proves this roof rake belongs to me, and that Patricia took it without permission from my unlocked shed." I began laying out the documents on the podium. "First, here is the receipt from my purchase of this specific model of roof rake last January. Second, here is a photograph from last April that shows the rake in my shed with distinctive orange tape on the handle that I added for grip." I held up the printed photo, and several people in the front row leaned forward to look. "Third, I have multiple videos taken over the past 2 weeks showing this exact same rake, with the orange tape visible, on Patricia's front porch." I pulled out my phone and played one of the videos on maximum volume so people could hear me narrating the date and time. Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. That rake is mine. I purchased it last year, and Samuel is simply trying to cause problems because he has some kind of personal vendetta against me." "You have a receipt for your rake?" I asked calmly. "I do not keep receipts for every single thing I purchase," she snapped. "I do," I said. Especially for items that cost $200. Also, can you explain why your rake has orange tape on the handle in the exact same spot where my rake has orange tape? And why it has a small dent near the base that matches the dent in my rake that I can prove existed before February? Patricia's face was getting redder. Lots of rakes have tape. Lots of rakes have dents. This is circumstantial at best. Richard cleared his throat. Patricia, do you have any evidence that you purchased this rake? I already said I do not keep every receipt, she repeated, her voice rising. Okay, but when did you purchase it? What store? Richard pressed. Patricia hesitated. I believe it was from the hardware store on 2nd Avenue. Last winter sometime. I jumped in. I called that hardware store yesterday. They only carry one brand of extendable roof rake, and it is a different model than the one on Patricia's porch. The one on her porch matches my receipt exactly, including the model number. The crowd was murmuring now. I could see people whispering to each other and shaking their heads. Patricia looked around desperately, realizing she was losing control of the narrative. Dorothy Chen, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. Patricia, I drove past your house yesterday and I saw the rake on your porch. It definitely had orange tape on it. That does seem like a pretty specific detail. Are you siding with him? Patricia said, her voice getting shrill. I am your fellow board member. We are supposed to support each other. We are supposed to tell the truth, Dorothy said quietly. Richard looked uncomfortable. This was clearly not the kind of drama he had signed up for when he agreed to be HOA president. Samuel, you mentioned you have concerns about other incidents. I nodded. After discovering this theft, I spoke with several neighbors. Tom Henderson, are you here? Tom raised his hand from the back of the room. Yeah, I am here. Can you tell everyone what you told me about your weed trimmer? Tom stood up, looking nervous about being put on the spot. Yeah. Last summer my weed trimmer disappeared from my garage. I thought maybe my son had borrowed it, but he said he did not. I looked everywhere for it but never found it. When did this happen? I asked. July, I think, middle of July. I looked back at the board. Tom's garage is directly visible from the street, and he often left it open during the day while doing yard work. Mrs. Martinez, you are here too, right? An older woman in the second row raised her hand. I am here. Can you tell everyone about your mulch? She nodded. Last spring, I purchased 10 bags of premium mulch from the garden center. I left them on my driveway planning to spread them the next day. When I came out in the morning, there were only 6 bags. I thought maybe I had miscounted, but now I am not so sure. More murmuring from the crowd. I could see Patricia's face cycling through different expressions, from anger to panic to defiance. This is a witch hunt, Patricia declared, standing up again. You are all ganging up on me because Samuel is vindictive and has convinced people to make up stories. I have served on this board for 6 years. I have dedicated countless hours to making this community better. And this is how you repay me, with false accusations. They are not false, I said firmly. You took my roof rake. I can prove it. And based on what others are saying, this is not the first time you have helped yourself to other people's property. Richard looked completely overwhelmed. I think we need to take a break and figure out how to handle this. No, Patricia said sharply. I refuse to dignify these accusations with any more of my time. If you want to remove me from the board based on the lies of this man, then go ahead. But you will regret it. I know every single violation that exists in this neighborhood. Every single one. And I will make sure every last person here gets fined for every little infraction I have been letting slide. The room erupted. People started shouting questions and complaints. Someone yelled, "So you admit you have been selectively enforcing rules?" Another person called out, "Just give him back his rake, Patricia." Richard banged his hand on the table. "Order! Everyone, please. Patricia, sit down. Samuel, do you have anything else to present?" I pulled out the last document. "Yes." Section 38 of the HOA bylaws states that board members who engage in illegal activities can be removed by a majority vote. I am formally requesting that the board open an investigation into Patricia's conduct and, based on the evidence I have presented, remove her from her position as vice president. "You cannot do that," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Dorothy was reading through a copy of the bylaws that she had pulled up on her tablet. "Actually, he can. The bylaws are clear. If there is credible evidence of illegal activity by a board member, the matter can be put to a vote." Richard looked miserable. "Patricia, I think the best thing right now would be for you to return Samuel's roof rake and for us to table this matter until we can consult with the association's lawyer." "I will do no such thing," Patricia said. "That rake is mine." "Then let us examine it," I said. "Right now. Let us all walk to your house and look at the rake together. If it does not have the orange tape and the dent I described, I will drop this entire thing and apologize publicly." Patricia's eyes darted around the room. She was trapped and she knew it. If she refused, it would look like an admission of guilt. If she agreed and the rake matched my description, she was caught in a lie. After a long moment, she grabbed her purse from the table. "Fine. Let us all go look at this stupid rake. And when it turns out to be mine, I expect an apology from all of you." The entire meeting stood up and followed us outside. It was like some bizarre neighborhood parade, 60 people walking down Willow Creek Drive toward Patricia's house in the dark. Some people were filming on their phones. Others were talking excitedly about the drama. I walked near the front with Richard and Dorothy while Patricia marched ahead of us, her posture rigid with anger. When we reached her house, the porch light was on, but the rake was not visible. Patricia stopped and looked around, confused. "It was right here this morning." "Did you move it inside?" Richard asked. "No, I left it right here on the porch." She climbed the steps and opened her front door, going inside. We waited in the yard while she searched. After a few minutes, she came back out empty-handed. "Someone must have taken it." The crowd groaned collectively. A few people laughed. "Patricia, come on," Dorothy said gently. "Just tell the truth. This has gone on long enough." "I am telling the truth," Patricia insisted, but now she just sounded desperate. "Someone took the rake from my porch." I had an idea. "Richard, Dorothy, can we check her garage?" Patricia moved to block the garage door. "Absolutely not. You are not searching my property without a warrant." "We are not the police, Patricia. We do not need a warrant," Richard said, sounding tired. "But if you refuse to cooperate, that makes this situation worse." For a moment, I thought Patricia was going to physically fight us to keep us out of her garage, but then her shoulders slumped slightly and I could see the fight draining out of her. "Fine. Check the garage." "You are not going to find anything." Richard walked up to the garage door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. He lifted the door and the automatic light came on, illuminating the interior. And there, leaning against the back wall next to a collection of garden tools, was my roof rake with the orange tape clearly visible. The crowd pressed forward to see. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures and videos. Patricia stood frozen on her porch steps, her face pale in the harsh light. "That is not the same rake," she said weakly. "Someone planted that there." "Patricia," I said, walking into the garage and picking up the rake. "It is over. This is my rake. Here is the orange tape. Here is the dent. You took it from my shed, you lied about it, and you threatened me when I called you out. Just admit it." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see multiple emotions flashing across her face. Then, suddenly, she burst into tears. Not gentle crying, but full-on sobbing, the kind that made her whole body shake. I did not mean to. I just needed to borrow it for a day, and then I was going to return it, but then you came over and accused me, and I panicked, and I did not know how to admit I had taken it without asking. The crowd was silent now, watching this breakdown. So you did take it, Richard said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I took it. I am sorry, Samuel. I should have just asked to borrow it. I do not know why I did not. I just saw it in your shed when I was walking by, and I needed one, and I thought I would bring it back before you noticed. When were you walking by my shed? I asked, because that seemed odd. She wiped her eyes. I was doing my inspection walk 2 weeks ago. Your shed door was open and I saw the rake inside. So you just walked into my property and took it. I borrowed it, she corrected, but there was no strength in her voice. Without asking, that is theft, Dorothy said. Patricia, what were you thinking? I do not know, Patricia said, sitting down hard on her porch steps. I do not know. I have been under a lot of stress. My husband lost his job 3 months ago and money has been tight, and I did not want to spend $200 on a roof rake when I saw one sitting right there. This explanation did not make me feel any more sympathetic. So instead of asking to borrow it or buying a cheaper version or any other reasonable option, you decided to steal mine and then lie to my face about it. She did not respond, just kept crying. Richard looked at me. Samuel, I am very sorry this happened. On behalf of the board, I apologize for Patricia's conduct. This is completely unacceptable. I held up the roof rake. I want to know what happens next, because if this was anyone else, Patricia would be the first person demanding fines and punishment. There will be consequences, Richard said firmly. He looked at Patricia. Patricia, effective immediately, you are suspended from the HOA board pending a formal hearing. We will schedule a special meeting within the next 2 weeks to vote on your removal. In the meantime, you are to have no involvement in board business. Patricia looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. You are suspending me. You stole from a homeowner and lied about it, Dorothy said. What did you expect? I spoke up again. I also want to know about the other items. Tom's weed trimmer, Mrs. Martinez's mulch. If Patricia has been taking things from other people, they deserve to know. Richard nodded. Patricia, have you taken anything else from other homeowners? There was a long silence. Patricia looked down at her hands. Finally, in a very small voice, she said, The weed trimmer is in my garage. I borrowed it and forgot to return it. Tom Henderson pushed forward through the crowd. Are you kidding me? I looked everywhere for that thing. I thought my son lost it. I am sorry, Patricia whispered. What else? Richard demanded. Some mulch, and I borrowed a ladder from the Hendersons' garage last year, and I took some solar lights from the Ramirez family's yard because I thought they were too bright and violated the light pollution guidelines. The crowd was getting angry now. Multiple people were shouting questions and accusations. Someone yelled, She has been stealing from all of us. Another person called out, She should be arrested. Richard banged his hand on Patricia's porch railing. Everyone, please, let us handle this in an orderly way. Patricia, I need you to make a complete list of every item you have taken from other homeowners. You will return all of it within the next 48 hours. If you fail to do so, we will have no choice but to involve the police. Patricia nodded miserably. I felt a mix of vindication and something almost like pity. Almost. I want my rake back right now, and I want a formal written apology delivered to me within 24 hours. You will have both, Richard said. Patricia. She stood up slowly, went back into her garage, and came out with the roof rake. She held it out to me without making eye contact. Here, I am sorry I took it. I took the rake from her, feeling the familiar weight of it in my hands. Thank you. The crowd started to disperse, people talking excitedly amongst themselves as they walked back toward their houses. I heard someone saying they were going to check their garage to see if anything was missing. Someone else was laughing about how wild the meeting had been. Richard and Dorothy stayed behind with me. "Samuel, again, I am deeply sorry about this," Richard said. "This is not how board members should behave." "I appreciate that," I said. "I just want to make sure this gets handled properly." If she had just admitted it when I first confronted her, this could have been resolved quietly, but she chose to lie and threaten me. "I understand," Richard said. "We will make sure there are appropriate consequences. And we will be reviewing all of her activities as vice president to ensure there have not been other abuses of power." Dorothy added, "I have always thought some of her enforcement was overly aggressive. Maybe this will be an opportunity to reset how we operate as a board." I nodded. "I hope so. This neighborhood should be a pleasant place to live, not somewhere people are afraid of their HOA board." We talked for a few more minutes about the process going forward, and then I walked home with my roof rake over my shoulder. Jennifer was waiting in the doorway, having watched the whole spectacle from our front window. "Well, that was something," she said as I approached. "That is one way to put it," I agreed, feeling exhausted. "Did you ever imagine it would go like that?" "Honestly, no. I thought she would just deny everything and the board would side with her. I did not expect her to completely break down and confess to stealing from multiple people." We went inside, and I leaned the roof rake against the wall in the mudroom where it belonged. It felt good to have it back, but more than that, it felt good to have stood up for myself and exposed Patricia's behavior. Over the next few days, Patricia returned items to various neighbors. Tom got his weed trimmer back. The Ramirez family got their solar lights returned. The Hendersons got a ladder they had not even realized was missing. Mrs. Martinez received a written apology and money to cover the cost of the mulch, since Patricia had already used it in her own garden beds. I received my written apology as well, delivered to my mailbox exactly 23 hours after the meeting. It was typed on nice stationery and was actually more thorough than I had expected. Patricia acknowledged that she had taken my roof rake without permission, that she had lied when confronted, and that her behavior was unacceptable for someone in a position of authority in the community. She apologized for any stress or inconvenience she had caused me. It read like it had been written by a lawyer, which it probably had been. The special board meeting to vote on Patricia's removal was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Once again, the community center was packed. This time, Patricia did not show up, but she had submitted a letter of resignation that Richard read aloud. In it, she stated that due to personal circumstances and the recent incidents, she felt it was best to step down from her position on the board. She apologized to the community and asked for privacy for her family during this difficult time. The resignation was accepted unanimously, and the board opened nominations for a new vice president. Dorothy Chen was elected to the position, and a woman named Susan from Maple Court was voted in as the new treasurer. Richard announced that the board would be conducting a full review of the HOA bylaws and enforcement policies to ensure they were fair and consistently applied. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for bringing the situation to light. Tom Henderson shook my hand and said, "I am glad you did not let her get away with it. People like that need to be held accountable." Mrs. Martinez hugged me and said, "You were very brave to stand up to her. I know a lot of people were afraid of her." I appreciated the kind words, though I did not feel particularly brave. I had just wanted my roof rake back and had been angry enough about the theft and the lies to push the issue. But I suppose sometimes standing up for yourself is a brave act, especially when the person you are standing up to has power over you in some way. In the weeks and months that followed, the neighborhood did seem to improve. The new board under Dorothy's leadership took a much more reasonable approach to enforcement. They focused on actual problems rather than nitpicking minor violations. When someone's grass got a little too long, they got a friendly reminder rather than an immediate fine. When Christmas lights were still up in mid-January, someone knocked on the door to check if the homeowner needed help taking them down rather than assuming they were being deliberately defiant. Patricia and her husband ended up moving away about 4 months later. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that her husband had found a new job in Wisconsin, and they were getting a fresh start. Part of me felt bad about the role I had played in what must have been a humiliating experience for her. But mostly, I felt relieved that she was no longer in a position to abuse her authority or steal from her neighbors. The incident became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Heights. New homeowners moving in would be told the story of the roof rake drama, usually with significant embellishments. I heard versions where Patricia had stolen dozens of items, where she had been arrested at the meeting, where I had physically tackled her to get my rake back. None of that was true, but I suppose a good story always grows in the telling. My roof rake continued to serve me well for the next several winters. Every time I pulled it out of my shed to clear snow from my roof, I thought about that whole bizarre situation. It was just a tool, a simple piece of equipment for removing snow, but it had ended up being the catalyst for exposing corruption and abuse of power in our small neighborhood association. About a year after the incident, I was elected to serve on the HOA board myself. I had not planned to get involved in that level of community management, but several neighbors encouraged me to run, saying they trusted me to be fair and honest. I agreed to serve a 2-year term as secretary, mainly handling communications and documentation. Serving on the board gave me a new perspective on how complicated HOA management can be. There were legitimate challenges in maintaining common areas, enforcing rules that most people had agreed to, and balancing the diverse needs and opinions of 50 different households. But it also confirmed my belief that people in positions of authority need to be held accountable. The board served the homeowners, not the other way around. During my time on the board, we implemented several reforms. We created a clear appeals process for any fines or violations. We established term limits for board members to prevent people from becoming too entrenched in power. We started publishing detailed financial reports every quarter so everyone could see how their HOA fees were being spent. And we created a community suggestion box where people could submit ideas or concerns anonymously. These changes were not revolutionary, but they made a difference. People seemed happier. There were fewer complaints and conflicts. Board meetings became boring again, which was actually a good thing. They should be boring. They should be routine discussions of landscaping schedules and budget allocations, not dramatic confrontations about theft and abuse of power. I also made sure my shed had a proper lock installed. Not because I did not trust my neighbors, but because I had learned that leaving your property completely unsecured was just asking for trouble. It was a small thing, but it gave me peace of mind. Looking back on the whole experience now, several years later, I think about what I learned. I learned that it is important to stand up for yourself, even when it is uncomfortable or scary. I learned that evidence and documentation are powerful tools. I learned that people in positions of authority can abuse that power in small but significant ways if no one holds them accountable. And I learned that a community is only as healthy as its leadership allows it to be. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing to do. It would have been easier to just buy a new roof rake and forget about the whole thing. It would have been less stressful to avoid confrontation. But letting Patricia get away with stealing from me would have sent the message that her behavior was acceptable. And based on what we learned, she had been getting away with smaller thefts and abuses for a while before I called her out. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not noticed the rake on her porch. Would she have eventually returned it? Would she have continued taking things from other people? Would her behavior have escalated? There is no way to know for sure, but I am glad I took action when I did. The whole situation also taught me about the power of community. When I first started investigating the theft, I felt alone in dealing with Patricia's intimidation. But once I brought the issue into the open, I discovered that many of my neighbors had similar concerns and experiences. They had just been afraid to speak up individually. By creating a public forum for the problem, we were able to address it collectively. There is strength in numbers and in transparency. I also gained a better understanding of why people behave the way Patricia did. Not that I excused her actions, but I understood them better. She had been under financial stress. She had gotten used to wielding authority in the neighborhood. She probably rationalized her behavior by telling herself she was just borrowing things, or that she deserved them somehow because of all her work for the HOA. People are complicated, and sometimes they make terrible choices when they feel desperate or entitled or both. The whole experience made me more aware of the small dynamics of power in everyday life. HOA boards, parent-teacher associations, office hierarchies, social groups. There are all these little structures where some people have authority over others. And in each of these contexts, there is potential for abuse if that authority is not checked. It does not always look like dramatic theft or corruption. Sometimes, it is just someone being unnecessarily harsh about enforcing rules or playing favorites or using their position to settle personal scores. But it matters. These small abuses can make people's daily lives miserable. I became more vigilant about questioning authority after this incident, not in a paranoid or hostile way, but in a healthy, engaged way. When someone tells me something is a rule or policy, I ask to see it in writing. When someone in authority makes a decision that affects me, I ask for an explanation. I vote in local elections. I show up at community meetings. I pay attention. At the same time, I try not to be cynical about community involvement or leadership. Most people who volunteer for HOA boards or other community organizations are genuinely trying to help. They are giving their time and energy to make the neighborhood better. Patricia was an exception, not the rule. The vast majority of board members I have worked with over the years have been honest, well-intentioned people doing their best in a thankless role. But exceptions like Patricia are exactly why oversight and accountability matter. We need transparency. We need clear rules. We need processes for addressing problems when they arise. And we need community members who are willing to speak up when something is not right, even when it is uncomfortable. My roof rake is now just a tool again, not a symbol of anything larger. It sits in my shed, properly secured with a lock, ready to be used whenever Minnesota decides to dump 2 feet of snow on us. But I will never look at it without remembering the winter when it taught me an important lesson about standing up for what is right, and the difference one person can make by refusing to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. The neighborhood continues to thrive. The pond is well maintained. The common areas are beautifully landscaped. People generally get along. The HOA board functions smoothly under reasonable leadership. New families move in and become part of the community. Kids play in the streets on summer evenings. Neighbors help each other out when someone needs a hand. It is a good place to live. better than it was when Patricia was using her position to intimidate people and help herself to their property. I am proud to have played a role in that improvement, even though it started with something as simple and mundane as a missing roof rake. Sometimes the smallest things can lead to the biggest changes. A stolen tool, a moment of courage to speak up, a community meeting where truth came to light. These seemingly small moments can reshape the dynamics of an entire neighborhood. They can show people that they do not have to tolerate abuse of power. They can demonstrate that accountability is possible if enough people care and are willing to take action. I still live in Meadowbrook Heights. Jennifer and I have talked about moving occasionally, but we always come back to the realization that we have built a life here. Our kids went to good schools because we lived in this neighborhood. We have made friends among our neighbors. We have invested time and energy into making this community better. And despite the drama with Patricia and the roof rake, or maybe because of it and what came after, this feels like home. The shed in my backyard still stands, now properly secured with a good lock. Inside it, among the various tools and equipment that accumulate when you own a home, sits my roof rake with its distinctive orange tape and small dent. It is ready for winter, ready to clear snow from my roof, ready to do the job I bought it for all those years ago. But it is also a reminder. A reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what is yours. A reminder that people in power need to be held accountable. A reminder that communities are built on trust and fairness, and when those things are violated, it is up to ordinary people to set things right. A reminder that standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. And maybe most importantly, a reminder that even the smallest injustice is worth addressing. Because if we let people get away with the small things become bigger things. If we excuse theft of a roof rake, we are excusing a pattern of behavior that disrespects property and honesty and basic human decency. I never wanted to be the guy who took on the HOA vice president. I never planned to become a local legend for a confrontation over a snow removal tool. I just wanted my property back and felt strongly that lying and stealing by someone in authority should have consequences. But sometimes, that is all it takes. One person who decides that enough is enough and is willing to do the work of documenting, presenting evidence, and demanding accountability. The story of Patricia O'Connor and the stolen roof rake has become part of the fabric of Meadowbrook Heights. New board members are told about it as a cautionary tale about abuse of power. Parents tell it to their kids as a lesson about the importance of honesty. Neighbors laugh about it at summer barbecues, remembering the night when 60 people marched down the street to Patricia's house to examine a roof rake. It is funny now, in retrospect. At the time, it was stressful and angry and uncomfortable. But time has a way of turning even difficult moments into stories we can laugh about, especially when they end with justice being served and positive changes being made. So that is my story. The story of how Patricia O'Connor stole my roof rake from my shed, and how I made her return it in front of the whole board at a meeting. It is a story about a small theft that revealed a bigger pattern. A story about standing up to authority when authority abuses its power. A story about community and accountability, and the importance of not letting wrongdoing go unchallenged. And it is a story about a roof rake, which despite all the drama surrounding it, continues to do its job perfectly well every winter. Because in the end, tools are just tools. It is what we do with them, and what we do when someone takes them from us, that really matters.